panel. My name is Cristina Katz-Cornejo. I'm an associate chair. I was going to say associate professor. No, I'm a professor and associate chair of the Department of Visual and Media Arts. Welcome to this panel. I just want to make one announcement to remind everybody that there is a film screening tonight at 7 in here with the writer-director Nicole Dorsey in attendance, and that there's a reception between 6 and 7 out here in the lobby, so you're all welcome to come. The next panel is Equity and Access in Emerging Media, moderated by Dr. Sarah Zaidan, and I'll have her introduce everybody.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming on this very cold and blustery time of day to be a part of this panel and discussion. As you can see, equity and access in emerging media is the topic that we'll be looking at tonight. And we're not just thinking about equity in terms of who is making the work, but also more than just who is the public face of the creation. Emerging media projects, certainly in my own discipline of video game development, it's a team effort most of the time, and usually with most successful game development projects, there tends to be, more often than not, a white male developer who's seen as like almost the auteur behind the work. And yet these projects are made with tens, sometimes hundreds of other creators, and it is important to acknowledge that equity, not just in terms of who's making the work, but the process as well. And in the case of all of you here tonight, it also has a lot of connection to the pedagogical work that you do. To start us off, we'll be hearing from Sarah Wolozin, who is the director of the OpenDocs lab at MIT.
Thank you. I'm actually going to stand up here.
And in the interest of me not saying things about each speaker on their behalf, I would like each speaker to say a few words about themselves in the interest of authenticity and introducing themselves as how they would like to be seen.
Okay. Yes, hello, I'm Sarah Wolozin. I'm the director of the MIT Open Documentary Lab, and it's wonderful to be here, and thank you to Christina for inviting me. We just put this study out called Collective Wisdom, which is really appropriate for the discussion today, because it is all about equitable processes and really looking at the process. So when you think about access and equity, not only in the making, but in how you're going about making your media. And this is looks at alternatives to singular authorial works. So, you know, the auteur is important, we love them, that we need them, but it's also looking at alternatives. What are ways of acknowledging how media really gets made a lot of the times? We're in a society where we, need to hold up the author, and that's the name that gets put out there, and the credit, and the IP, and the money. But oftentimes we all know that we're co-creating. And what this study does is it looks at this practice that's underrepresented, but's everywhere, that people have been doing it for a long time, that they're doing it in all kinds of ways, and that it allows us to talk about process and what it really is in a way that's more real and is maybe a different way of thinking about it. So when we looked back at the study, we went all the way back to sacred texts. In fact, if you look at sacred texts, we don't know who the author is, right? They're always made collectively. And it was really with industrialization that we started to hold up this single author. For the reasons I said. And so we're taking that back and saying, with emerging media in particular, we can rethink how we do things. They need new processes. You can't, go out and make a film and put that on augmented reality. It doesn't work. Or a game. It's just an entirely different process. So as we're rethinking those processes and the languages and the way that it's marketed and the way it's funded, we can rethink sort of how it's more just and equitable and how it recognizes more people along the way. In our study, we talk about 3 types of co-creation. One is within a community. When you go out and you make a film, sometimes you go into a film, you interview people, you come back and you make it. But in this way, we say, no, you're not making a film about a community or for a community, you're making it with. So you're going into a community, you're getting to know them, you're talking to them, and you don't have a set idea of what the project is. It's really something that emerges out of a relationship you build with the community. Wouldn't that maybe give you a more honest and more real idea of what that community is, of what your story is, if you're really listening to each other? So we're looking at that process. Also across disciplines. When an artist and a scientist, a media maker and an urban planner work together, rather than the media maker going in and just interviewing them, talk to the urban planner, see what makes the most sense for urban planning. Do they need a film or do they need a little app? And again, through that relationship and taking what each person knows best. The urban planner knows all the planning, and the filmmaker knows how to tell stories, and putting those two together to come up with something new that hasn't been done before. And the final area that we're looking at is human and beyond human. So artificial intelligence. It's now, they're trying to make it more like an intelligent human system. So if it's not a tool and you're working with machine learning or what have you, and it does things that surprise you, that impact and influence what you make, is that a tool? Is that a master slave? Or is that a collaborator? Is that someone you're listening to and that is impacting and influencing the project in a way that a camera wouldn't? Or with we're studying artists who are working with insects or termites. This one artist worked with termites, and she gave them sand and they made them into beautiful homes, and then she colored them in different ways, and that was her project. It was a collaboration. So really, it's a moment with emerging media especially, to really rethink how else can I tell stories? How else can I get to truths? How else can I represent the world? So we looked at a spectrum of collaboration, because people say, well, what is co-creation? How is it different from collaboration? If on one hand, you have the media maker-driven collaboration, right? I want to make a film about Xerox, some old-fashioned thing that came to my mind. And so you go and you find someone to help you make that film. On the whole other side, a nonprofit wants a film made about them. So they go and they find a filmmaker to make that film they want about them. Co-creation is in the middle. It's, the nonprofit and the media maker meeting, not having any preconceived idea of what they're going to make together, but just starting to talk and talk and talk until something comes out of it. Can be a more slow process, can require patience, it can be a little more difficult, but you might come up with something that's never been done before. It's a process of discovery. We also looked at it in a lot of different disciplines. So what can you learn from architects who co-create with their people who are going to live in the houses they're making, or urban planners, as I said, or tech, software, they open source and the way that they collaborate. What can filmmakers, media makers learn from them and bring to their own process of creation? We define it, we say co-creation offers alternatives to a single author vision. It's a constellation of media methods. It's many methods, it's not one, it's just something that's different and new and collaborative. And the projects emerge out of the process and evolve from within communities and with people rather than being made for or about them. It spans across disciplines, organizations, even beyond them. It ethically reframes who creates, how, and why. Co-creation interprets the world, seeks to change it with a commitment to equity and justice. So, if you're not using an equitable process, it's hard to make equitable projects. So this project used media scholars, documentarians, placemakers, technologists, journalists, students, movement builders, researchers. It was a very co-creative project, study. There we have a manifesto. Just quickly, I'm going to give you the URL so you can go look at it yourself. But basically, the 10 points are that the projects emerge from a relationship. It's about a process. It's with people. It reframes who gets to tell this story. It's a discovery process. You respect everyone's expertise. Everyone has different expertise. You respect those, including first-hand experience, lived experience. It uses appropriate technologies, workflows, tools, protocols, leaderships, teams, and roles. So it's we have big problems in the world right now. We're really at a point where systems are not working, and there's a lot of inequity in this world. So what can we as media makers do to change even how we put out media? Because media is the lens through which we understand the world. We want it to be impactful, sustainable, healing, reciprocal. If you go in and make a project about a community, with a community, what do they get out of it in the end? Really thinking about that. And I can give you some great examples of projects that have been done. For instance, one where in Canada where they went into an Indigenous community, and only 3 people spoke the language. It was dying. So the community itself created a script based on that language. Then everyone acting in it had to learn that language. And then they created jobs, and all the money went to the community. So in the end, you had a film, but you also had a lot of people who now spoke that language. And you had new jobs, and you had new skills. So thinking about that as you're going out in the world and making, what else can you do besides just make the project? What kind of impact can you have? How can you solve problems with the media itself? And then, of course, to share and to learn and be open and transparent. So this is Collective Wisdom. It had 100 interviews, participatory review process, 221 readings, 251 projects. So if you want to learn more, you can go to cocreationstudio.mit.edu and find it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was very insightful and inspirational. I absolutely love phrasing it as projects emerging out of process. And next we will be hearing from Anya Belkina, who is not only an artist and animator, but one of our faculty here at Emerson.
Okay. I think I will skip slides in the interest of staying closer here to my notes. I will not be speaking so much about my own work, but maybe share with you some insights that I had in my teaching as a pedagogue and also in my service. Since the subject of this panel is equity and equal access, I want to think, and maybe you can help me think through the questions of who may be the groups here on campus whose access might be restricted to the emerging technologies, that particular tool set that's evolving and it's new, and what can we do to improve the situation, to increase access, decrease inequality. So I guess for me the story started in 2007 when I was hired here at Emerson, and I started teaching computer animation courses. The program that we use is called Maya. A lot of you in this room may know the program. And though it seems to be used very commonly by animators, the array of skills an artist must have in order to conceive, develop an idea, create storyboards, map out characters, their appearance, model the geometry that constitutes their bodies, apply different textures to various body parts, rig that whole system so that it's conducive to the behavior and the actions that the character would do in the scenes. Light everything, render everything, do post and music, and come up with a little short animated piece, all done by a single author. So that's, this is a very tall order for a student who is doing it in a semester, maybe in 2 semesters, and whose output is compared to Pixar films or independent short that might be done by teams, groups of people. Over the years, I have collected a little book that maybe I will publish when I'm much older. It's called Dear Anya. I didn't bring it here. There's no time for me to read excerpts from that book. Some of you have heard the stories, but they're desperate pleas from the students that I get in every hour of the day and night. And they usually start, "Dear Anya, Maya ate all of my files. What do I do? Maya hates me." Something that became very apparent and clear to me, that producing short films in CG is very different from shooting short films on film, is not really apparent to a lot of students who enroll in computer animation. And so I started thinking about 2007, 2008 and 9. This is where sort of the genesis of the idea of changing curriculum started. But I started to think, well, how can we make curriculum not so much oriented toward creating a beautiful, polished reel that will get somebody in the door, but how can we use the tool, which is really a tool for simulating our physical reality, right? Maya is a very powerful program that enables you to generate human-like characters or create particle effects that simulate dust particles, or to create any lighting condition. How can we take this simulator of reality and use that for improving our own intellectual processes, or really for thinking about meta-thinking? If I am to subordinate a bunch of body parts on a character who is not really live, how do I order that system? What are the priorities? Which bones I subordinate to what? Right? How can we make the study of physics, chemistry, anatomy, geometry, can we foreground that, the scientific background behind the program? Can we use the program as an excuse of, enriching our minds, looking into other disciplines that might interest us very much? Can we even wrap our minds around concepts like relativity with Maya? And why not? You can apply a camera, assign it to any point in space. You can have multiple points with lots of cameras, move them all and see if you can make any sense of what's moving actually and what's static. You can't. So very esoteric and abstract concepts about coordinate systems, absolute and relative coordinate systems, things like this, became very fascinating to me, and I'm just trying to perhaps make this fascination contagious. How can we use the tool that's made mostly for creating entertainment, be a tool for our intellectual development and for really sharpening the way of thinking of cause and effect chain dependencies. And another aspect of learning this program, which is very powerful but also very glitchy due to its being so powerful, how can we use it to understand what we're seeing in the media and on the screen? Can being makers of digital characters make us more attuned to what is human? And can we actually learn to distinguish between CG-generated characters and real people that inhabit our physical world. Is it really important to make that differentiation? Sarah brought up something very interesting. Did you say non-human agents? Transhumanism has gathered a lot of momentum. I think it's important that we start thinking about what transhumanism is and what do digital representations of ourselves do in virtual worlds, and how can we balance sort of the dual function of those virtual worlds as modeling something that could be then replicated in our everyday environment. We can test a lot of things virtually and pick maybe the best solution for, I don't know, creating burns in Port Point where I happen to live and where the rising water levels are really creating some damaging effects to the environment and the neighborhood. So in that respect, visualizing and simulating technologies can be very helpful in solving our physical crises. But also, what do we care to bring from this physical world into the virtual imaginary universes that we create? Who controls those universes? Who creates the rules of the games that the characters that we create inhabit? So there's some general comments here, a lot of comments to make. Going back to the access issue, though, I do see that being a professor and kind of teaching with the way, with the tools that I have and my intellectual interests, is bringing a lot of women in the classes. When I started here, my first year, I had 2 women and 11 men in the classes that I taught. And those levels sort of gradually changed with some parity. I do feel that I'm doing community service to Emerson College by teaching these courses. They're incredibly stressful. There's a lot of pressure for the students and the instructors, especially at the end. So much depends on delivering the final product, and that is completely out of control of students and faculty. If the render farm is working, great. If you can do it on your machine, great. If your computer breaks down, you are cursed. And there's no time to recover. I mean, you can rewrite a paper in one night. You cannot possibly rebuild your environments if you like them, and so on and so forth. So I think that there are 5 groups of people who may choose to self-select out of the classes as they are right now. To my mind, and there are probably different opinions here, I'd be curious to see what you think. Students with disabilities, especially students with psychological disabilities, might find it very hard to be confronted with unanticipated and irrational responses from computers that we think are very rational. So they may kind of exclude themselves from taking these classes. That's one group of people. There are also some people who suffer chronic vertigo effects and a range of other conditions that may be precluding them from enrolling in these classes using VR gear. There are students from socioeconomic backgrounds who don't have the accumulative advantage of having access to powerful souped-up PCs throughout their childhood, and who might feel intimidated to learn the technology that others in the classroom might be very comfortable with. And then there are students who come from different cultural backgrounds, for whom English is a second language, which it is for me. So the double stress of learning another language and having to perform in this very high-pressured environment with lots of stress might be too difficult. And there are some students who, the 4th group, I think, who, how should I put it? It's very difficult for me to talk about these issues, who, may not be necessarily well adapted to a very masculine and high-pressured environment, who may not necessarily strive on stress. I know some people do, but who may find that just kind of who may be looking for more co-creative ways of developing CG assets. And then another group that I think of often, and it was really heartening to speak, some other panelists mentioned that, are students who may be victims of domestic violence or sexual violence. And for those students especially, I think putting on VR gear may be problematic. They may not say anything to anybody, but they just kind of shy away from those classes. So with all of this in mind, I have been thinking personally and together with some colleagues, how can we create courses that remove these obstacles, remove the barriers? Can we create courses that invite all of these groups in, where they feel protected, safe, and appreciated for their particular backgrounds? So with that in mind, the course that I'm co-teaching with my colleague Cher Knight for the first time is really placing emphasis on, you said, sacred texts. We're dealing with sacred rocks, so we're looking at all sorts of historical precedents from many cultures where large public rocks were revered. I did a lot of reading here, obviously. You know, the range spans so many cultures and times. We can think about the Wailing Wall, for example, the Spirit Stones of China, or the really controversial Temple Mount. So all of these sacred sites can be researched and understood within the context in which we find ourselves here. Not many of you know, but on the common there once stood a very special stone. It was a wishing stone for the neighborhood, and young people and children used to have special rites where they would circumambulate 9 times around that stone and sit on top of it, make a wish. It doesn't exist any longer, but that little bit of history, local history, that's very particular to us, our campus, is kind of is a platform, is an initial starting point that invites students to begin their modeling assignments. There's not a lot at stake. It was very important to me and to my collaborator that we start with a project that has a historical meaning assigned to it, that embraces traditions that the students might be bringing in from their cultures, and is really feasible and possible to build within half a semester. So I don't have slides yet, but I do have some very beautiful hard copy posters of the 3 projects that were just submitted a week ago, and one of the artists is actually here in the audience. Pixie's right there. We have our first crop of redesigned wishing stones, and I will just sort of quickly flash these at you and begin wrapping up. So as you can see, they're really works of art that go back to the traditional art forms of the artist who designed the project. This one is by Anne Zhang, who made this beautiful scroll-like artwork with a wishing stone that she designed in Maya. We have Pixie's incredible creation here, and it's beautifully rendered. A wishing stone that refers to many things. And Pixie has taken many art history classes, so it sort of harkens to O'Keeffe's work, and also plays in an interesting way with the idea of inside and outside. And then we have finally one project that's probably most relevant to the historical context. This is an idea of recreating the wishing stone by making 9 instances of them so that kids can hop from one to the other one as they make their wishes. So this was incredibly fun and very rewarding to not only see the students work and how much they thrived in this environment, but to co-teach a class with an art historian and really co-create this pedagogical experience. So I'm hoping that after this first iteration, we can make changes, improve the class, and that it will become a permanent offering, thereby encouraging more students from different backgrounds who traditionally don't like enrolling in computer animation classes to consider taking that class. So that's what I wanted to show you. I think it took a little longer. I'm really proud of this course. I'm really proud of the students enrolled.
And rounding out the panel, we have Rashin Fahandej, who is a new and very welcome addition to our faculty in the Visual Media Arts Department here at Emerson, and a brilliant transdisciplinary artist.
I think I'm gonna take refuge to my slides. I like the visual. Maybe a little bit of the transition here. Let me just put my camera to that way. I can. Yes, I can.
Oh yeah, this is what we do. These are the digital characters that we build. And it's much more difficult to build those than rocks. I can assure you of that. Right. You can close this version.
I'm gonna open this one. Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. And I'm very glad to be part of this amazing panel, and also a new faculty at Emerson. So it's very thank you for the welcome. So, I feel like especially Sarah's presentation with the co-creation process, I feel it's a good segue to a little bit after the short presentation I will do, thinking about co-creation and taking that sort of the authorship of a singular creator and expanding it beyond and thinking about community. So when I come to the art space, I generally think about how the creation is such a powerful space, but also is such an intimate space. And that sort of power and intimacy is a very interesting even juxtaposition. So I'd like to think about how there would be different opportunities to bring those potentials out in the creative process. I've been a fellow at Open Documentary Lab, so that kind of co-creation idea has been a big part of my making in the past 3 years. So with that in mind, I think about how we can think about, and especially like coming to the emerging media also, whenever we talk about something new or something emerging, we would love to think about the potentials, that what could exist. But also, on the other hand, I think there is the ethic and the morals of when something is new, how we can establish a discourse around it, and think about that space that is being created. And it's been amazing to think about how in the emerging media this idea of access and equity has been a very prominent conversation in most of the spaces that we go, and the criticality is still kind of sustained, which is very important. So I come to the art creation thinking about art as an ecosystem. how it could be a network of collaborations with a multiplicity of narrative that investigates social system and occupy public sites as a critical discourse. So I am a multidisciplinary artist and filmmaker. I thought maybe I'll just bring one example of my project quickly and kind of taking you through that, and then we'll engage with the question and answers. So the project is called A Father's Lullaby. So I do think about it as a case study for this idea that I'm thinking, that like how an art project could expand beyond the self and how it could engage many people in the process of it from this different disciplines, and particularly the community. So the project is a multi-platform project, and it centers on the childhood experiences and marginalized voices of absent fathers, and also invites all men to participate by singing lullabies and sharing memories of their childhood. So the project is about mass incarceration and absence of fathers, but coming to it from this space of love and intimacy. And I'm going to show you just a few slides thinking about immersive spaces as a way of engaging the body and the participants' engagement with the space. What you see there, and you would see that image multiple times, is the trend of, it's a graph, it's trend of incarceration in United States from 1925 to 2015. And also this image on this side also is based on data that from every 3 African American men in United States, 1 would experience incarceration in their lifetime, and 1 from every 6 Latinos. Sorry, I'm not very. So I'll just go through these quickly. So thinking about process, how the space of creation could create equity or brings tools to the community. So with this one, I really tried to kind of think about how in every stage of the process there could be tool sharing and working with the community directly. This one is a series of like research into the community and looking at this space of incarceration and absence through the lens of women and their sons, and how their women in the community are raising their son single-handedly. So these are some of those. And then this was in the Villa Victoria, so I'm going to just go through these. But thinking about how the arts, if we are thinking about systemic change and bringing new ideas, how it's really a collaborative process and bringing many people from different sides to this idea. So at the beginning of this project, I started 3 different programs. I was an artist in residence with the mayor's office in Boston and working with the community center. So I took the research as a program creation and working with different ages and going to the community and talking. So this is kind of thinking about how different stages of the process and thinking and the research could be done together. So some of those, so 3 different programs, and also engaging academic institutions and the students from academia to engage with the idea and do their own research and do co-creation workshops at the center. So these are a group of students from Emmanuel College that they were engaging for 1 semester with the community. And then I think about when we talk about ecosystem, is not just the people and what sides of the disciplines or what side of the community we bring together, but also thinking about how the engagement with the space is also about access, like who's experiencing it. And you mentioned it, Sarah, you mentioned it at the beginning, it's who we bring together to make the work, but also who gets to experience it. So the space of public space is a very interesting site to thinking about social justice issues, experiencing the art, and also creating new memories based on these new thoughts that we bring. So the next chapter of the project was thinking about creating these sound installations in the public side, that the top level of the sound is the lullabies that is collected from the immediate community. So when you're walking by, not knowing something is art, but encountering it and experiencing it as part of the landscape of the city, or maybe this sort of unexpected aspect of the landscape. And then the second layer of sound were memories that fathers who have been incarcerated shared. And those are activated through your body. So when people were walking through the space, if they become interested in the sound and they come closer to the sound source, then your body would activate the second layer of sound, which is the memories that fathers who have been absent shared. And those are much more intimate. The lullabies are more projected, and the memories of fathers are, you have to sit down and you have to kind of encounter it with your body. And then again, kind of thinking about the shared experiences in the public side and bringing the work to the public rather than asking people to go to the institutions. So this was a test, like I'll show you. It's a shipping container, thinking about creating this sort of immersive experience, but also participation in a public and being able to take the project to different sites. So again, that graph on the back is a trend of incarceration. It's kind of wrapping around. And on all the installations, there is a platform, a web platform that everybody could participate by recording their voice and singing a lullaby or sharing a memory, and also kind of thinking about how that could be, the site could be used as a way of giving access to more people to tell their stories. And those are touch panels, I'll come to them. That with this one, I was thinking about how the witnessing somebody else's story is a very much in a space of, it has to be more of in a space of vulnerability while it has the agency, in a way that like you activate the sounds through this sort of deep listening and sitting down, and as long as you're holding your hand, you can listen to the story. And then the next iteration of it, it's now at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. It will be up till end of December. If you guys are interested, you can go and experience it. Kind of thinking about when you have access to the tools and to a little bit more resources, then it's a much more immersive, like a space in that landscape. But I'm really interested in taking the project out in the public side rather than the institution. So now that it is in the institution, the commitment is to constantly taking people from the neighborhood, from the community, and taking them through the tours. Maybe people that they don't have generally access or think about going there to go to the space. So those touch panels are now kind of like, there are three basically portraits of three fathers who are sharing those stories. And the piece itself is there's 5 movements of different spaces, from lullabies to talking more directly about the memories, and also thinking about technology. So in this one, there is we used from a stop motion animation of creating the graph from literally moving the particles of an still dust, to using volumetric filmmaking to create this sort of in-between spaces of being present and not being present. And also kind of thinking about the lineage to, of incarceration to slavery. And so I'll go through these a little bit more quickly. And then thinking about, again, like using all the tools. So for example, a web platform that everybody could go and record their voice, and their voice will be part of this map. There are some data, but also kind of thinking about the pedagogy that Anya was mentioning. That's also like thinking about all these spaces being possibilities and opportunities for engagement, and bringing more minds into these social challenges. so one of the ways that I will be engaging, so one of the a couple partners on the projects are Office of Returning Citizen and the Federal Probation Office. So next semester we will be doing a co-creation VR class at Emerson and working with the families of incarcerated fathers and thinking about how we can tell stories and narratives together, and also with the students and what that means. You know, when we talk about equity and access, like as the students and as faculty and as like public who have been experiencing that, how can we break those power dynamic? And I think like one of the things that is amazing with the co-creation study to think about how the lived experiences of everybody coming to that space is an expertise, and acknowledging that as an expertise, because we cannot create a new work or think about new space without our process and mindset has, you know, shifting. So I think I'm gonna just leave it by on that note. I actually want to show you a 1-minute video of the installation. The installation is 3-channel. If you imagine this, each one of these being on a 17 feet tall, but I thought it would be good to just show you 1-minute example of the piece. Oh, well. So the sound is not connected. It's coming out of this one. It's all right. So you can experience it in that's all right. I think it will be, yes. Okay. No, that's all right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashin. And are we waiting to see if this will?
Because the sound is not connected to the it's coming from the computer. I think we no point of showing it. But if you guys are interested, you can go to the yeah.
So now we'll turn it over to the room and start taking questions from everyone. Yes.
So, it's a really interesting project. There's like the Instagram handle, like social script, where they have fathers, like African American fathers, like showing what it's like to be a caring. Like the whole thing is talking about how in the media they're portrayed as absentee fathers, and this whole like huge like movement on that, showing fathers being fathers. Like, it's pretty cool. I always call it. Anyway, I was just curious, like, what's the process of choosing the stories for this? Can you speak into the mic?
Oh, sure. Yes. So the question is how to what stories will come to the installation, how I choose to bring the stories to the installation. So one of the idea for the work is that it would never be, like it would be an ever evolving work and organic. So I would like people, when it moves from a city to another city, that it would be a very kind of feels local, and it feels that you can hear the narrative and the stories of people surrounding you in that space. But it is a very difficult choice, you know, like this is the choice that we all make in terms of you work with a lot of powerful stories, but also very difficult stories, and how you process them in order to think about what part of that story you would present in a way that other people would have access to it or can encounter it. Because one thing that I think with the work is that the space of poetry is very important. I don't want the participants to come and encounter. I want maybe one thing that I can say is that poetry and like a little bit of a remoteness from the hardship of the stories, we are able to like encounter and embody them a little bit more deeply, rather than kind of like a flip of the screen that we encounter like every day on the news. So with the immersive space, it's very much reliant on the lullabies and songs. And you would encounter, there's two movements that you would hear. People like the fathers or the mothers telling their point of view of this space. But where you would sit down and you hear more in-depth narratives are when you sit down personally and you're encountering each character one-on-one. And it's hard to say like how how I choose it is more kind of like, I come from painting background, so when I kind of so I lay down everything and I experience everything, and then you would kind of put them together in a way that it would make sense for that space. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I'm like answering. And also like part of it depends on the process. It is very collaborative in the end result, but like this installation particularly, it has not been collaborative in terms of working with the community to choose the stories, like what I tell. But it's been really empowering to see them. I have in the stages of it work with people hand in hand in the editing process, but not with this installation. And that's why I think the pedagogy would be interesting kind of a space to think about bringing this to the classroom, and then how we can think about it together throughout the process, and work together from the, collecting the stories to the execution and presentation. But that's something, when we talk about access and equity, we always forget that a lot of time when we are working with a very marginalized group, to come to this space and co-create is a privilege. It's not something that you can just assume. People have to take time off to come. Even for experiencing the exhibition, I had one father like on the opening night being there, like literally from 4 to 9, but he had to shift his work time. He had to like switch job. So it's a lot of commitment when we talk about co-creating. It's a lot of commitment on the part of community. And how can we create a system or a space that it will allow for the marginalized voices to be part of the co-creation space?
So I guess a little bit following off that question and some of the things that Anya and Sarah also said, I find that even within a school like Emerson, there's so much inequity already baked in, leaving aside all the people who would never have the opportunity to come to a school like Emerson. Even within the students that are here, there's a great deal of inequity in terms of comfort with technology, in terms of confidence, in terms of expressing themselves. So I'm not sure my question is fully formed, but I guess sort of maybe for each of you, like a recent strategy that you discovered in the last year, or a recent success that you've had in terms of crossing that inequity that maybe is something you tried and that you feel like has worked and you want to keep working with to lessen the impact of inequity even among your students or your collaborators. That's a big question, but just to hear any thoughts.
Are you talking specifically with emerging technology or just in the process?
I guess, you're in a different position as program director, but things that you've seen or tried in your practice, whether it's for Anya and Rashin who are teaching, but you're doing a little bit different, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well about how do you, even within, you cross a threshold. The people that you're working with have crossed one threshold, but there's still inequity. The inequity didn't stop at the threshold. Do you know what I mean?
I'll just answer and then give it to them, just in terms of what I've seen in the creative process. And if you're talking about emerging technology and people who are less comfortable, I think with the co-creative process, it is first and foremost establishing respect for whatever you do bring, and recognizing that. Sometimes when storytellers and technologists used to work together, the technologists thought the storytellers were clueless, and the storytellers thought the technologists were just there to, you know, implement their stories. So there was just this lack of respect for what each group was bringing and an inability to understand what each is bringing. So I think, you know, you don't have to be an expert in everything. You just have to figure out what your own expertise in and create an environment where that is, you know, enabled, and you're kind of creating the right space for people to figure out how they can contribute. Because the beauty of co-creation and collective experiences is no one has the same expertise, right? Everyone has something they're bringing to it, and you can't create a good story with technology if you don't have good storytelling, and you can't, you know, have a good story made if you don't have good technology. So you really need all these different perspectives, and so whatever you have, you bring to it, and making people realize what they do have, and things like that. So that's what I've seen.
Maybe to kind of build off of that, like, you know, when we talk about access or when we talk about equity, one element is tools, and especially with the emerging technology and emerging media that is very fast moving. But also another element is information. And that's very interesting for me to think about, that in a space that there is so much knowledge available, but the knowledge is so inequitable in a way that, like, as like even in the classroom, like when you think about like the pedagogy, like there's so much that we don't know about each other's experiences. So that's why I don't think about, when I think about access and equity, I don't think about it as a one-way street. Like, I don't think about us going to the community, bringing the tools, like, or like sharing the tools, because actually there is so much knowledge there that we have no access to, because the cities are planned in a way that we don't encounter each other, or spaces are created that we kind of see people that they are more similar to us, or so it does become, like, I think if we come to it with that sort of mindset, it is an interesting space to think about how it is equitable when all of these expertise are taught about. And also, like, you know, when I thought about social or spatial justice, I think information justice is interesting, like, to think about when we come to this space, we don't have and, you know, like, my lens is very much social justice, so I work on projects that use technology, but the idea is to bring it to the to that lens of, like, how can we bring attention or, like, shift to that space of the challenge. But I want to kind of, like, leave it maybe with that. I don't know if it's answering that question or not. So I think, like the classroom would allow with that opportunity of thinking about it in terms of, like, even information.
I'll try to quickly make 2 points, Julia. Thank you for a great question. So, number one, in my classes, I decided to shift focus from a beautiful product making experience to engaging with the humanities, right? So, read plays, research historical artifacts, and through recreating them with all of these advanced tools, learn their composition in a more intimate way. So that's number one. So basically focus it in the humanities, tools secondary. And the second thing is a bit paradoxical. Can I show some slides? Because, you know, we've got these really fancy laser scanners. Well, we have a laser scanner, and then we have the white light scanner. And it can be somewhat forbidding to use this technology, but in a strange way, it actually is liberating for the students, because it enables us to work with clay in the studio, create little clay puppets, and then instead of building them from scratch in Maya, we can scan them in a matter of seconds and have the files. So I just want to show you one artist, one, you know, wonderful student of mine who created a prototype, and then it was digitized. Part of my slides. Okay, so this is, you know, starting from scratch in Maya, building faces like this takes takes a lot of time, takes a lot of knowledge of anatomy, all of the facial muscles of expression and articulation, and that can be a serious barrier for those who don't feel themselves particularly apt at technical things. But okay, I'm going to skip through this. This is Tanya. This is my wonderful Tanya Voss. She's holding a figurine that she made of clay. I'm going to zoom in and show you. Okay, so it was a tactile experience that was really therapeutic with all of the stress and with, all of the errors and computer things. Enabled her to decompress by building something like this. And then we have, I'm not sure if I have a movie. Can I play a movie unplugged in? Yeah. Just gonna find my drive here. Okay. I hope I brought it. Maybe it's not on this drive. It's a little spin cycle of the sculpture. Maybe not. Okay, so instead of showing you a beautiful 360 rotation of Tanya's model, I will show you what we're doing with the spirit rocks in the class I'm presently teaching. That other one is from animation class a year ago. So looking at the prototype of a collector's rock in Rosenblum collection, making an armature for it. Right here is the armature on the stand, and then going through a really wonderful process of sculpting, actual like studio practice at Emerson College. Right, not in Paris, but here in our mothership here, building sculptures, texturizing it, and then turning it into a scanned object that can be manipulated, texturized differently, used as a prop in a little short, and so on and so forth, maybe in a game environment. I'm not sure, Julia, if I answered your question, but I think, the students really, love it. Joining tactile and digital, giving kind of both sides of the brain a little working there, a little experience.
We've got enough time for one, maybe two questions. Yes.
I wanted to ask, I'm sorry, I'm not really sure how to pronounce your name. Is it Wolozin?
Sarah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the process that you would use to engage with the community in terms of finding out whether they would have the proper resources or abilities or interest in working with you on a project?
That's a good question. What is the process you use to decide whether a community has or what resources they have, or whether they're a good fit for a project, essentially? Well, I don't think you go in you don't have a set project when you start out. So if you're wanting to work together, then it comes from what the community is. So if it's a project where a community only has access to cell phones, they don't have broadband or something, so then you would and they want to tell their stories or what have you, so you would work with them on that way, and really understanding what technologies they use, how they use those technologies, and build the story from there, versus saying, oh, I want to go do a story using the internet, and then you go there and actually that's nothing they have access to. So it is really about spending time with the community. And I mean, projects can come from the community who wants something. It can come from, you know, the idea starts somewhere. But I can give you an example too, where we were doing a project in Kentucky around future of work and artificial intelligence. And the only reason we were doing it is because someone from Kentucky happened to have gone to MIT, and so he was a bridge between his community in Kentucky and MIT and artificial intelligence. And so it was something he wanted to do, and knew people, and you know that he was from the community and knew what the issues around future of work were. And so the project evolved out of his knowledge and his knowledge of the community and his sort of interest in bridging the his MIT experience and his local Kentucky experience. So you know, it's an organic, there's no set process. But if you're listening deeply to each other and addressing problems. Another one, the co-create, I'll make this quick and then give it to someone else, but co-creation comes from a very well-known program in Canada called Challenge for Change, in which they gave cameras in the 70s to communities to tell their stories and then brought those to politicians. And it was really through the process of actually telling those stories within the communities, and the outcome wasn't so much the politicians as much as the community starting to hear the stories within there. They hadn't been talking to each other, and together, by actually listening in a whole different way and speaking in a whole different way, because there was a camera there, they were able to, you know, save their fishing industry and come up with some solutions themselves. So, you know, you just gave them the camera, but they were really the ones you know, who were solving the problems and creating the media with a completely different outcome than what maybe you expected going in. So that was really listening and letting it evolve organically.
Hi, my name is Rina. I'm studying DNA at Emerson, and it was interesting to see your like speaking of like co-creation, and it was interesting to see that, you know, working with community, friends, and like co-workers, whatnot, is also part of co-creation. But I also believe that audience is taking part of co-creation because it completes the experience. And I'm curious on thoughts of how you would take advantage of technology these days, because it's so advanced and everyone has a smartphone and everyone uses YouTube, Facebook, you know, social media. And through those, people from like the other side of the, you know, earth, or, you know, some other countries are able to, you know, look at what people have done in, let's say, like Boston, Emerson, or, you know, the other way around. And I'm just curious what your thoughts on how you would take advantage of this emerging media with easy access to be able to communicate with other parts of the country or the world. Because I think it's something that we've never had before, and it's also something that we can take advantage of. So
Yes, that's a great point, and one of the great hopes. You know, with the internet, when it was developed, you know, there was that was the vision, right? The open internet. And throughout, as technology evolved, the projects became more sophisticated, and there were a lot of interactive documentaries in the 2000s that really, you know, had all kinds of themes that really what you're doing is enabling a discussion so people can come in and participate. There's this, one of my favorite projects is called Question Bridge, and it's about black males. It's just many videos about black males, but the filmmaker didn't go in and interview black males. He actually had black males ask questions to other black males. So it could be someone who had a question, you know, about, you know, why didn't you leave us a blueprint for after the civil rights movement or something. It was a young person to an elderly black man, and then there were 6 different answers. So it was really creating this dialogue where anyone, any black male was in America, could talk to anyone else, and you could have 8 different answers and 8 different questions, and it just created that wonderful thing that the internet can do. So I think that's a really strong potential of it, and one of the great affordances, because people were working on the internet, that you had all these participatory type documentaries, exactly for the reasons you say. So yes, it's a great idea.
And we are 1 minute ahead of schedule. So if we have a round of applause for our brilliant panelists.